Hello, I'm Matt Ralph, managing editor of Philadelphia Soccer Now, and I'm pleased to be joined by Phill Grooms, someone I've known over the years out in St. Louis, and someone who's been around since the pre days of St. Louis City SC, and someone who's familiar with the Philadelphia Union's new head coach. So thanks for joining me, Phil. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. Thanks. It's good to chat with you again, Matt.
So, first of all, we've kind of been hearing the rumblings about Carnell, and honestly, I'm a little surprised there wasn't more talk about him from day one when Jim Curtin was fired.
Hmm.
But what's sort of your reaction to this? And obviously, he's been with Jesse Marsh with the Canadian national team after it was a shock to me to see him leave St. Louis especially after their successful inaugural season. But what was your reaction to hearing that he had landed here in Chester?
Oh, I think it's a good match. And I was hoping we'd see more Bradley Carnell somewhere, of quality. So, Philly is that for sure. He didn't take a step down in any way. In a lot of ways, he's probably taken a step up. I'm excited for him. I think he's a great coach. I think he, um, will be a good match for you too. I'm especially like you said, he didn't last long here. It was a bit of a surprise how fast he was fired from St. Louis, and so I'm actually excited to kind of help me read the tea leaves on. There are a lot of questions that we still have about why did he leave so soon. What kind of coach is he after only 2 years? I think we're going to get a little more introspect into what he's actually like, because we only got 2 years with him.
Yeah, you only had 2 years, but obviously a little bit of a runway, right? And I think from my
True.
perspective as someone all the way, here in the East Coast, and we had a coach for so long, it's like the thought of, I mean, I'm like, wait, how do these press conferences even work? I haven't been to one of these, So, but from my perspective, he did a great job in terms of being the face of the franchise before it really was ready to go, right? So
Mhm.
in terms of his communication style, his communication skill. And I think, there's a lot of pessimism around this team and missing the playoffs for the first time since 2017. We've been a little bit spoiled. Like playoffs are kind of like, oh yeah, they made the playoffs. They do that every year. And I think there's a lot of pessimism. And I thought he handled himself well, and I was not surprised by that because what I do know of him is he's very well spoken. He's got a great accent. I could listen. You can listen to him talk because he's very articulate, and he's also very precise in how he speaks about what he wants to do. He really kind of eloquently laid out like what the Red Bull way is, and in a way that I haven't quite heard communicated as clearly and concisely as he did today. So that's kind of been my perspective on him in terms of he's a good hire in terms of what he represents in terms of being a face of a club, being someone who was able to introduce a team to a whole city, and do it in a way that was very successful. I mean, I think on the field, off the field, the launch of St. Louis City was more successful in by a long shot than Philadelphia Union was.
Hmm.
So here he comes, obviously a club that's been around a little more season, not as season as Red Bull when he spent time there and was the interim guy, but it seems like the sort of what we've been spoiled by with Jim and someone who's a good communicator, that we're not going to lose anything as far as the communication and him being able to talk about what he's trying to do, even if it's not working.
Yeah, no, not at all. You won't and he doesn't give excuses either. I would say you get what you see with him, and I agree. There will be no kind of like mixing up what he's like or what he wants or what he expects from people. He will say what he's going to do, and then it happens. And so I think that's some of the he's a culture guy, and I would say to add on to like everything you said is nailing him dead on. And I think you are going to get a very Red Bull kind of coach. And so when he says he's defining what that Red Bull style is for him, he said he expressed it in a better way than you've ever heard. That sounds just like him, and you're going to get that. You're going to get a lot of that, and you're going to do it really, really well, I would say. And so he's a culture guy on top of that, and so he to get that the top out of each player, which I think he did a very good job of. He has really high expectations, and then um, if you don't match those expectations, then it seems like maybe you're not going to play and you're not going to be part of that team going forward. So that's something to watch. That was part of what made St. Louis so amazing in the first year. And I do think that's a little bit of perhaps add to the problems in the second year. But, I think when you have a lot of young players and you're trying to implement along a lot of young players, I think that style works really well. And I think that culture expectation is a good thing. I think it works better with young players even than the older ones. So he's a great coach, really great to talk to, and I think you're going to be happy with the straightforwardness that you'll get from him.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that I always thought, like, the day was going to come, right? And I mean, I think there's the shock is worn off at this point with Jim Curtin getting fired. And, in a lot of ways, it's understandable, right? If they weren't going to fire him after them missing the playoffs for the first time in forever, then when were they going to fire him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Jim got as long as he did is a testament to who he is as a person, who he was as a manager. But it was also probably this is the time to move on. And the question now becomes, it's always hard to follow a manager who's been at a club for a long time, especially a manager who's been successful, but not quite successful enough within, what the expectation is. So that's probably the concern that I would have right now is just, you know, I don't doubt I can see why he was hired, and I think it's a good hire. Like it looks like a good hire. It looks good on paper. It makes sense. He's known Ernst since he was playing
Mm-hmm.
in the Bundesliga, playing in Germany. So there's a lot of like synergy from that perspective. But the question I always have is like, what is the league in 2025 going to be? Like, where is the level going to be? And I think again, like watching St. Louis come in so like, exciting watching. I mean, we saw a shell of a dinner on in his time here, but like
Yeah.
seeing how good he was when he came out and just the excitement of the fan base. And then you're always like, hey, that's great, man. I'm happy for you guys, but it's gonna fall. Like it's
Mhm.
not you can't maintain that level. I mean, Atlanta was like seemed indestructible, and look what
It's
happened to them.
true.
Toronto was, this juggernaut, and then they became a really expensive like flop for maybe they still will be. So it's sort of this league is always, and Jim used to say this a lot. Jim Curtin would say, this league humbles you, right? And this team, the Philadelphia Union, have been humbled, and it took a while for them to sort of for that to happen. And then you got to make a change. Like you can't. They have too many commitments on contracts to just like dump the whole team and start over. So you
Yeah.
change the manager. Where are things at? I mean, in terms of St. Louis, and what do you think is the legacy of Bradley Carnell there? As you sort of face 2025 with certainly some uncertainty around the club.
Well, I think St. Louis is in a really good position. I think part of Bradley kind of getting kicked out halfway through the season, that was also just like a rebuilding moment. It was kind of like they didn't wait. You know what I mean? Like there was a good year and then there was a bad half of a year. And instead of kind of giving him time and waiting to see what happens, they just cut ties with him while also rebuilding the roster. And so it took half a season for that rebuild to kind of happen, but the rebuild is done. I don't expect to see a ton of players added in this winter window here. And so we'll just see what the new coach who came in, Olaf Melberg. And so we don't know much about him at this point. Actually, we were hoping to get what you got today, which is, a nice presser with him at some point. So hopefully we'll get to talk to him, pick his brain a little bit, learn about him. I'm really excited to see how he brings this team up because we got one style with Bradley Carnell, and then when Hackworth took over, it was a totally, totally different look. And so Melberg has, who knows what he's going to bring. But the players are there now. I would say, there are a lot of things to kind of chat about here, and I'm excited to hear your opinions on some of this because you look at what Carnell did in the first season. It was like the pressing style wasn't common in the West. And I think it just really worked better than anyone thought it would to do it in such a way that St. Louis did, such an extreme way. And I think it just worked more than expected. And so it just kept going and going and going. And for some reason, I think they kept waiting for it to end so that they could kind of focus on other things and give players rest. But it just kept going. The winning kept happening until the very end. And I think we just drove this team into the ground. But the other part of that, I don't know if people disagree with me, but just something I think about is that it felt like no Western teams adjusted to St. Louis's style. And so I think right at the end there, we saw SKC, especially in the playoffs, just bunker in and say, I dare you to try to score. You can press all you want. We're just going to lump it and just wait for you to try to score on us. And it just wasn't, St. Louis sucked at it. It was really, really bad. And we were beaten every time someone bunkered in on us. And that works on every team to some extent. Talking to Evan Villela about that, it's what he said. He's like, that's what everybody does to a pressing team. And he's right. But there was no plan B. And that was what we figured out after season one. Going into season two, there was supposed to be this developmental evolution of a plan B. Injuries made it worse. Our team, just on top of that, we got exposed for the quality of the roster. Honestly, we were second or third bottom in roster spend, and it caught up to us, MLS style, kind of in a way you were laying out there, Matt. And so instead of like a rebuild under Carnell, we got rid of Carnell and did the rebuild. So I don't know what you think about that possibility, but I also think about like the future of MLS. I've been thinking about some of the quotes from your players, your top players, when you didn't make the playoffs, about focusing too much on academy players. And I kind of got that vibe too, where we were trying to use everyone in the team, and we did under Carnell in the second season, and it failed miserably. And we went out and spent money, and we looked better. And so I don't know if that says anything to the academy plan, but Carnell's coming into a similar situation. Curtin complained about having high end players. Carnell's going to get the same thing. He's going to expected to do a lot with a little. And, does that model even work anymore? I don't know what you think, but you're looking at similar problems with a similar coach who's coming in to kind of implement Ernst's style. But I don't know what we're going to